Let me unmute the mic. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Bear Show. I'm Ivan Vargas. Before we get started, and I want to get started quickly because we got a special guest tonight, Robert Schmitz from Windy City Gridiron, and Run Pass Opinion podcast is on tonight. Going to be talking Senior Bowl. He was down there in Mobile watching some of the guys work out, watching the game. So he's going to have firsthand experience and firsthand knowledge of who to look for in the upcoming combine and the upcoming NFL draft. It was one of the last times these guys are going to be able to showcase their skill set. So it's going to be a good time talking Senior Bowl and, of course, Chicago Bears with Robert Smith from Windy City Gridiron. But before we get started, make sure you go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to SportsZone Chicago on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, like, share, and subscribe to another Bear Show on YouTube. Make sure you download the SportsZone Chicago app wherever you get your apps from. It was a crazy day yesterday as far as the NFL. They have a lot of awards going on. This morning was kind of it was fun this morning, although it was a very down morning to start, knowing that Devin Hester, I kind of slept through the back end of the awards. So knowing Devin Hester didn't get in as a first ballot Hall of Famer is very disappointing to me. I was pissed off. Sean was pissed off. Hopefully this is just a blip in the road and he gets in later on. I mean, eventually he has to get in later on. Eventually, I guess he should be a first ballot Hall of Famer, in my opinion. Change the game, change rules for him. It is what it is. All right, there goes my speech. Like I said, I want to go ahead and get this guy in real quick. Robert Schmitz from Windy City Gridiron. Robert, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me. Crazy day yesterday. I was really upset about Devin Hester not getting in. I'm kind of coming down from that now. You know what I'm talking about? But
yeah,
a guy that changes the game, and I hate to get started right now because I know we got Senior Bowl and Bears.
No, are you kidding? I want to talk about Hall of Fame.
Well, so awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
What breaks my heart about the Devin Hester dialogue is that I'm still hung up on Charles Tillman, which is going to sound so silly, right? Because I think there are tons of Bears fans that would look back and say, are you kidding me? You're talking about Peanut? Like, don't you want to talk about Olin Kreutz? Don't you want to talk about Lance Briggs? Like, there are bigger name Bears that haven't made the Hall of Fame. And I'm with you. If you change the game of football, I think you're more worthy of the Hall of Fame than, say, the third best linebacker in, 1998 or something like that. And we still hear about the peanut punch in playoff games, in divisional games, in games that have absolutely nothing to do with Chicago. It's very clear that Tillman changed the way that cornerback is played. And no, he wasn't necessarily Darrelle Revis in terms of, let's call it lockdown ability. But did you know that Charles Tillman forced more takeaways than any other defender of his era? I mean, in the world of forced fumbles, the only one with more than Tillman, who had somewhere in the 40s, was Robert Mathis, a defensive end, obviously. And the only player that had more interceptions than Charles Tillman was Charles Woodson of his area, who had about 10 more. But obviously Woodson didn't have the forced fumbles. Tillman didn't have the, Mathis didn't have the interceptions. So Tillman is the clear and obvious takeaway expert. I know we're talking about Devin Hester. He'll be fine. I mean, we're talking about the most legendary returner ever, broke multiple records. Whether he's a first ballot or not, I think comes down to the fact that the way that the Hall of Fame voting is done is a little, let's just leave it at it's imperfect. But I am still going to be sitting here waiting around for the next, 17 years so that the senior committee can get Tillman in, and Hester's going to be well in before then.
Yeah, and it was weird because, let's just start out with the Hall of Fame. It was weird because, like we talked about changing the game. Then you look at some of the guys that are on there. Richard Seymour. They were comparing Richard Seymour and Steve McMichael. And it's like, whoa, Richard Seymour, Steve McMichael have similar stats. Like, whoa, what's going on here? And it just baffles me how you don't. It's either they didn't appreciate this the position, or they don't appreciate special teams as a whole, as a unit. I mean, when a guy on special teams who we talked about it this morning, you were. Let's say for the Super Bowl, for instance, when somebody's punting, you're pretty much walking away. Let me go run to the bathroom real quick. Or if there's some special team, you're pretty much back in the day before Devin Hester, you were running away from the special teams play. When he showed up, you couldn't move. It was must-see TV.
Oh, yeah.
And every single time he would touch the ball, you would think he would take it back. What other player on – and I know with special teams, it's not a sexy unit, but what other player made that difference in the team? What other player made the league change rules for them?
So let me play. Are you comfortable with me playing the other argument? And remember, I love Devin Hester.
No, I like these conflicting opinions.
Totally.
I enjoy that.
I would tell you with a straight face that I think Devin Hester and Michael Jordan are similar in the sense of the legend of Devin Hester is part of the story. Like with Michael Jordan, what if he had gone to more titles? What if he'd lost some? I mean, kind of like LeBron has. Well, it ruins that mystique, that legend of 6 for 6, right? It ruins a lot of the allure of this. The story, honestly, for Jordan is amazing. And what could Devin Hester have done as a returner to make his story any better? I mean, he took back the opening kickoff of a Super Bowl, for crying out loud. And we forget to mention that, like, part of the reason Hester was such a legend is because he was on a team that had no offense to speak of. So Hester seemingly scored almost as often as the offense did. I mean, the devil's advocate would say that after his first about 3 years in the league, he was a very good returner that just didn't find his way into the end zone at even close to the rate of those first 3 years. But those first 3 years, in my opinion, were enough to get him in. Now, like you mentioned, special teamers like Ray Guy are still on the outside looking in. I mean, it would, if anything, it would have been a true reversal of the way the Hall has tended to do things for Hester to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. But I'll be the first to tell you, I think that there's no shame in being a second or third ballot Hall of Famer. If anything, I think the fact that Brian Urlacher seems to have been the last one in terms of his first ballot class is a reminder of just what an impact you have to have for some of these, let's remember, writers to vote you in first ballot. It's not a bunch of football guys, right? It's writers, and that can make things really hard.
Yeah, and it comes down to, you know, your social abilities. It comes down to whether you had a good relationship with said writer. And we all believe Devin's going to get in, right? We all know he's going to get in. There's no chance. Well, I wouldn't say there's no chance. I wouldn't say there's no chance.
How could he not?
There's no explanation that makes sense. I would say that there's no explanation that makes sense to where Devin Hester doesn't get in. But let's go ahead. I know we went right out the gates with the Devin Hester stuff.
Sure.
But let's get into the Senior Bowl, because I'm looking forward to Ryan Poles' first offseason, his first real, true test is going to be this combine and this draft, right? I mean, he's going to have to handle free agency up until, even during the season. But the draft, his very first draft, with limited resources, how do you see Ryan Poles attacking this? Does he stay true to his word in that introductory press conference where they get tough, they get nasty, they build up the O-line, they build up the front? And I say that, and I ask this question because this is how the last regime got caught up in some BS, because they went ahead, they said all these things that we bought into, and they didn't deliver.
Oh, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, at least from what I've seen over, the end of the Phil Emery era and the end of the Ryan Pace era, if there's any similarity that we can draw there, it's that whenever your team starts losing and it's time for people to get fired, everything comes up. Has Chris Ballard lied to his fans, quote unquote? I don't know. They've won enough that I haven't gone back and checked. Does that make sense? Like, it's bad when you start critiquing your owner, because most teams don't care about what their owner says. But thankfully, to get back on track, we got some sweet Senior Bowl swag from being down in Mobile. I got to see firsthand a lot of these football players. And I will tell you what, Ivan, this is my first time really going through a draft cycle and digging into who these players are. It's been a lot of fun, but it made me realize just how few people really, I don't want to be the guy who immediately comes out guns blazing and says, a lot of these people don't know what they're talking about. But there are players out there like Christian Watson, the wide receiver from North Dakota State University, who's getting a lot of traction recently. The guy was projected to be a 5th rounder up until the Senior Bowl started. And I don't know the story of how that happened, but that is just ridiculous.
He's 6'4". He's 6'4", and I'm glad you mentioned him first, because he was the first guy that really flashed. I mean, there was the kid from Memphis, obviously Penning.
Of course.
What the hell? What he was doing. I want to hear the stories of just
offensive line and receiver. Do you mean Calvin Austin?
From Memphis. The offensive lineman Penning from northern Iowa, but the Memphis receiver.
Memphis is Calvin Austin.
Right,
and
right.
he's
But
a
Penny was
boss.
just doing some nasty stuff, and I
Yep.
wish I could just give me all the content of just
Right.
seeing him fight people during practice. I want to see that. But going back to Watson and Austin, like you said, 5th round projection comes to the Senior Bowl and just 6'4", big target. Made a play. First play he made on his butt, gets up and starts fighting for more yards. Like that's something that and I know they adjusted the rules, but that was just awesome to see. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh
He
yeah.
was the first guy I saw.
All that to say, as we dig into this, because I want you to feel free to ask me about positions, and I'll tell you who I saw. A lot of people out there might be confused. I was always confused on how guys would shoot up draft boards, right? It'd be like, he was projected to be a 6th rounder. Why are people mocking him in the 2nd all of a sudden? That can't be right. And honestly, having been at the Senior Bowl, to me, the answer became obvious. People don't know. A lot of people come into this part of the draft season not really knowing who their favorite players are. It's hard to put almost 200 people in order off of a draft board when all you're watching are random pieces of tape that you can find. Obviously, as in the NFL, it's different, but we never get their boards. So guys like Christian Watson, who, if he's not taken by the 70th pick of the draft, I will be floored, right? He's going to rocket up draft boards, and that doesn't mean any suspicion. If anything, it means that somehow people came away low on him, probably because he was an FCS receiver. But at the Senior Bowl, he reminded every single person there that he is head and shoulders better than just about anybody on that national squad.
And we're going to go with another guy since I wanted to ask.
Please.
Malik Willis. Willis, quarterback from Liberty. He was playing at Auburn, transferred to Liberty. He's a guy, and I don't say it as he's a backup talent. He could blow people away in the NFL if coached up right.
Right.
But he's a guy that I'm like, man, he came out of nowhere. He has a similar skill set. Let's say he falls down, right? Let's say he falls, a significant, maybe 4th, 5th round. Do the Bears, right? And I don't think he will. But let's say something happens where he falls. Do the Bears take a run at him? And he has similar skill sets to Justin Fields. He can move, and it might not necessarily be him. But will the Bears take a guy like that? Would it be smart for them to take a guy like that because their backup situation isn't very good?
So I remember this story, and maybe you've heard it before, where the Indianapolis Colts at one point got asked, a reporter specifically asked a member of the coaching staff, why in the world does Peyton Manning get all of the reps in practice? I mean, don't you want the backup to get some? And the coach basically turned to the reporter and said, look, if 18 goes down, we're effed. And we don't practice effed. So while I totally agree with you, their backup situation is not perfect with Nick Foles right behind him, and that's if he stays on the Bears. I don't know if you really can think about an alternate quarterback. You're talking to the wrong guy about Malik Willis because I think he's going to go top 10. I mean, I think Malik Willis.
He was fantastic. I was just saying in my speaking, I'm like, if for some reason he falls and the Bears oh wow,
somehow
best projected player, we're talking about taking multiple tackles, and taking other linemen high.
Absolutely.
You might as well create competition. But Malik Willis played himself into that top tier.
There's an aspect of competition that I think is best evidenced. Think about the 2020 Bears season, right? Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles were competing, with the problem being that they ended up kind of creating an offense between the two of them that was specialized to neither of them. Competition at most positions, take left tackle, can be really good, but your quarterback is often so specialized that unless you are the rare team like the Ravens, where you find a backup that is kind of Lamar Jackson light, you end up within the frame of competition, I think anyways, just sort of making your offense a little bit too generic. Let's say I want the Bears to build around Justin Fields. Part of that's because I believe in Justin Fields, but I also think kind of handpicking your quarterback and saying, we're building the offense for that guy and we will figure it out later if he gets hurt. We're just going to hope he doesn't. I don't know. I think the Bears have too many holes, whether it's linebacker, whether it's second safety, whether it's the second cornerback or quarterback in general, whether it's their defensive line. That's just the defense. We haven't talked about their offensive tackle. They need a center, probably need a guard, whether it's in free agency or not. They need 5 wide receivers. That's not a typo. They have 1 under contract right now. And pretty much the only 2 positions I would say that they are well and set at are running back and tight end, because I don't think they're going to run a lot of 12. You know what I mean? Like they could use a lot more bodies in quarterback. But I'm also a huge Malik Willis fan because you watched the playoffs just like I did, Ivan. I mean, you need a superhero nowadays. If you draft Kenny Pickett to get Mac Jones's 11 wins and he gets annihilated in the playoffs, what have you accomplished? I mean, Aaron Rodgers won the MVP and couldn't score more than 13 points against the San Francisco 49ers. I'm not trying to dog on Rodgers. I like Rodgers a lot more than I should as a player. As a Bears fan, the player Aaron Rodgers has always he's been so fun to watch, even though he's usually killing us. But
you love to hate him.
Oh, yeah. All that to say that you've seen, like I have, you need a quarterback that can score a field goal in 13 seconds. You need a quarterback that can find a way to go sackless despite Chris Jones being draped around him 4 different times across a game. It's amazing what these guys have to do in the playoffs, but if you don't have your superhero, you need to find one. I think Malik Willis is the NFL's best shot at a superhero. He is a raw project. But because he played at Liberty, you know he's accustomed to playing on a team that has problems and dealing with complex situations, let's call it. And I think Ritter and Howell have some intrigue to him, but I am really glad that the Bears took a quarterback last year instead of having to deal with it this year.
Yeah, I think Malik Willis is like perfectly said. He's the type of guy that could get you out. He knows how to get out of a jam, knows how to work his way out of a sticky situation. But let's get off of hopes and dreams with a Malik Willis types. Let's stick to what Ryan Poles was telling us: nasty, tough, build in through the middle, and also Alan Williams for that matter. He mentioned it in his press conference. It starts in the middle on defense. You build from the middle. What did you see as far as O linemen? Who realistically, let's say, if the Bears do first, their second round pick or their third round pick on an offensive line, let's say one in that area, who do you think the Bears should target? Who impressed you enough to say, hey, man, I want to take him with, what was it, the 38th pick? Do they have 39th pick? 39th pick in the second round.
So the first question is going to be, do they stick at 39? Right? Because this seems like as good a draft as any. As I've started watching these players, right? Not all of them. It's not like it's some draft where I'm going to sit here and tell you, oh, it's loaded with first-round talents. I mean, let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's more to say that you could build a real nucleus through this draft if you have more picks. They don't need to trade all of their picks, but say the Bears get an offer to move back to somewhere between 50 and 60 and pick up an extra third while they're doing it. That could be really valuable in a draft like this. So if they stick at 39, the guard, potential center, but he's played much better at guard, Zion Johnson, is obviously a hot name, and he's a hot name for a good reason. I like the offensive tackle. He wasn't at the Senior Bowl. His name's Tyler Smith. You want to talk about nasty? Go look this guy up. He just punishes the guy in front of him, regardless of who it is. Strong hands, almost a little too much nasty sometimes, but I'll take somebody with too much of it and tell them to tone it back, especially on offensive tackle, potential offensive guard.
Give me the nasty. Give me the nasty, and I'll worry about the penalties and stuff later.
Jamari Sawyer in the later rounds is hilarious. Right now he's projected to go 4th, 5th round. I don't think he'll get there. I think he's going to be a late 3rd. We'll see. He played tackle at Georgia. He can barely move laterally, but he is a brick house when it comes to moving people off of drive blocks, which are the ones where you just block straight in front of you, and also stopping people on bull rushes and just about anything within that phone booth. He is a tackle that I think you shift him to guard, and he'll be really, really successful in the NFL, at the very least, especially at value. There are a lot of these guys that I think fit well. Penning, obviously. Like I tried to avoid some of the very clear and obvious names, but this draft in particular, I keep finding myself asking a simple question, Ivan. I want you to answer it. Is there any one player that at 39 can make the impact of potentially 2 players? Because I don't know if one player fixes the Bears right now, whether it's on offensive line or wide receiver or defensive line or any of these. But you give me like 3 very good players instead of one potentially very, very good and one pretty good player that you get at 71, and I'd be ecstatic.
I don't think there's any player in this draft that's just head and shoulders. I haven't seen him. I haven't watched it during the season. There's not a quarterback, not a running back. Defense and linemen are going to feast, but those aren't really sexy. Like even watching them, you have to kind of you have to even you could miss an offensive lineman and defensive lineman. That's why you find a lot of offensive linemen in the later rounds because it's like their potential probably wasn't there to start, but then they got coached up, they got taught up, they got stronger, and they made an impact. I just don't see it right there at 39. I think I'll just say this. I think what they have to do, what's necessary is just what you said. They have to find at least two contributors right away, right? Find one guy, whether they stay at 39 or not. That guy if you stay at 39, that guy has to contribute right away. I feel like if you're going to go ahead and stay there and be like, hey, we're going to stronghold this, that guy needs to be the guy that's going to be ready to go ahead and compete right away. And then you got to get lucky maybe in the later rounds of the draft. You got to get lucky and hope that maybe you get a cornerback that contributes. That could contributes right away. Starts is a special teams guy. Maybe you find a special teams guy that really contributes right away. I think that that is and like I said, you're absolutely correct. I just don't see that guy, and I would agree with you. Trading back, I want more draft capital. I even thinking about trading players. Right, you can listen to it. I mean, always listen to offers. I'm not saying to pull the trigger. I wouldn't be too upset at a defensive player going. You know what I'm saying? Just because you're talking about Justin Fields. One side's talking about Justin Fields building him up, and then the other side's talking about how aggressive this defense has to be. And it sounds like they're happy and content with the players they have on the roster right now, and they're going to go in there and try to compete with them. But it's like, well, if you're trying to build with Justin and you're trying to get younger, trying to get more ferocious, or up front, and you're trying to find more playmakers, it just makes sense to try to find a way to get more draft capital, whether that be trading a player or trading picks, what have you. The more draft capital for me, the better. I mean, for you, right? Like, let's say, let's ask you, if Ryan Poles does trade back, where does he start? Like, who's your? I know we're talking about offensive line. And I want to get into skills positions in a second. Who would you target? As of right now, before we get into wide receivers and running backs, who would you target right now if, let's say, they do trade back? Who's your first guy? Or whether they trade back or stay put, who's your first guy?
So it depends to me. One thing that I want to just say that you couldn't have put it better, Ivan. I agree. You found something I haven't been able to put into words. I want the Bears to leave this draft with at least two guys that are ready to play and ready to contribute right away. They've only got 25 players on their roster, so this can't be that hard, whether they play because there's just nobody else or whether they play because they really are that good. But I think personally, if the Bears could secure a trade back, add an extra third, add an extra fourth, add some extra picks, you raise the chances of, instead of having to be perfect, right? Instead of having to go 2 for 2, you can go 2 for 3, because the pick I keep going back to, I think it's the best example we're going to get for the next 10 years, Ivan. I love Tevin Jenkins. Everybody loved Tevin Jenkins, the pick. And we took Tevin Jenkins and everybody was over the moon, as we should be. We spent 2 picks to get him due to the trade up, and suddenly he's got a herniated disc. He needs back surgery. Now he's a really good prospect that just had back surgery, and suddenly a whole bunch of Bears Twitter changed their minds and said this is a terrible pick immediately. You never know with these guys. No matter how much you love a player, they're always one fielded punt in Atlanta from a torn ACL, if you catch my Tariq Cohen related drift. I mean, you just don't know. So for me, trading back, remember, we're talking 10 players, right? We're talking passing on Zion Johnson, and instead, potentially, you're probably not getting Penning because he's as far up the board as he is, but you're still getting either a very good guard. The name that keeps coming to mind for me is South Alabama's Jalen Tolbert. He's a wide receiver, and I thought he was a stud. Played on the American team all week, and he is what, when I say X and Z receiver, do you know the difference between the two? Because if not, I'm happy to just
the X is a standstill. The Z is a move around. He's in motion.
Yes, nailed it. The X tends to be a bigger guy, often handles a lot of blocking assignments, and needs to be able to win on the outside. Tolbert is a fast receiver that went to South Alabama in the first place because he wanted to be a dual sport athlete, and that was the only place that he could find that would actually let him pursue both his baseball and football dream. But he, to me, projects as somebody who would not only be really good in his own right, but pair really well with Darnell Mooney, because that's the key here, right? Darnell Mooney is a true Z receiver, so the Bears need to find a way to find that X receiver, whether it's in free agency or the draft, and Tolbert jumps out at me. I think that they could go with a corner if somebody like Darion Kendrick falls further down the board than people expect. That's the corner out of Georgia that's especially nasty in his own scheme, but Eberflus's defensive scheme isn't quite as corner heavy as even Chuck Pagano, or not Pagano, Sean Desai's was. So I don't know if the Bears would prioritize corner over an offensive line or wide receiver skill position, but I'll tell you, there are a ton of options there. I mean, if Devontae Wyatt falls, that's a defensive tackle I know I'm keeping my eye on. I love Devontae Wyatt. Current draft projections have him so often falling into the 70s. No. I mean, if that happens, I think the NFL's crazy. But he is somebody who would pick up right where Akeem Hicks left off, which is a crazy thing to say in Chicago. I know it is. But not a lot of guys are 330 pounds that move like they're 265. And he's one of them, has tons of power in his hands, is somebody that I personally think projects to be a better pro than Jordan Davis, his teammate. But I know that's a little salacious. I just can't help but look at the guy and think high motor, phenomenal player. The Bears need a 3-tech that especially can help out on the pass rush. He'd be ideal for it. But a lot of options around the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, you're thinking, and Tommy Harris, right? Tommy Harris, like you're thinking about, like that's who I want. Like that's when I think about 3 and I think about a guy that I want in the middle, Tommy Harris, and God bless Tommy Harris. I wish he was just healthier. You know what I mean? I wish he just stood healthy. Looking at this wide receiver group, right? Mm-hmm. You know, we talked about the big player. We talked about the big plays, or the finding some big plays. We talked about finding a big wide receiver. Where do you think is the best spot for a wide receiver? Right after, like, if let's say, do you necessarily have to prioritize receiver? Right? Can you go ahead and find some receiver? Because got Christian Kirk. There's a couple receivers out in free agency that I think, obviously with the lack of receivers on the roster, you have to kick the tires on. Absolutely. And maybe they could find something there. But do you think that there's anybody that's, and obviously it sounds like you want to go heavy. It sounds like you want to be beefy up front and protect Justin Fields. But if you were taking a receiver number 1, who's the number 1 receiver you would take?
Like if I got a receiver 39 specifically, or do you mean if I got to take the first receiver in the draft?
Let's say you stood at 39 and say you stood at 39 and you were selecting a receiver and you were like, all right, you know what? We see the O-line, like the O-lineman that we wanted wasn't there. The other guys are kind of okay. We're not sold on them. Who would you take as a wide receiver off the board at 39?
It is so hard to tell right now. I mean, there are some phenomenal receivers out there, and so many of them are hurt that I don't know where they're going to land. I mean, I'll tell you right now, my favorite receiver in the draft is Jameson Williams. I think he's phenomenal. He will not get to 39, or at least he shouldn't. But the players that are there, you asked about, should the Bears go heavy there? I personally think there's going to be a drop-off after early to mid-round 3. I think that the guys like Jalen Tolbert, Christian Watson, Bell, Drake London, George Pickens, like a lot of the guys that Bears fans have just whipped themselves up into a frenzy about, Jahan Dotson. Man, I botched that. And others. They're all going to go round 1, round 2, early round 3, and then there's a drop-off. You can find a Romeo Doubs somewhere in there. You can find a guy like, yes, exactly, Russell Mechie, another option. Though he's another one of those guys that's hurt. But here's the problem.
Yeah, the Waddle. Were him and Waddle both hurt? Like those 2 wide receivers back-to-back years? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. The question becomes, if I was Ryan Poles, this would have been the perfect year, which obviously this isn't real, for the draft to happen before free agency. But it's not. I'm not even thinking about centers right now, personally, because I assume the Bears are going to sign one. I mean, whether it's the guy from, whether it's that backup or not the backup, I think there's somebody that came off the Titans. There's another guy off the Rams. And then obviously his name escapes me, the one from Tampa Bay.
Ryan
everybody
Jensen?
wants. Yes, Jensen. Thank you so much. So many names are just floating
Yeah,
around.
is
We've
it
seen them
Jensen or I
before.
think it's Jensen, not
I think
Jansen.
it's Jensen.
Yeah.
But so I assume the Bears are going to pay relatively large money for a center that's going to come in, be a veteran presence with a relatively young offensive line. I don't know what the Bears think of Larry Borum right now. I mean, if you asked me right now, you put the metaphor, or you just made me write it down, right? I would tell you that Larry Borum at this point is a really solid swing tackle option in terms of his youth, but it's really hard to gauge what he looks like as a starter right now. Tevin Jenkins too. I mean, he barely played. He looked good in that the Minnesota game. He looked bad in the Green Bay game. And Borum in particular had a really rough go of it at the very end of the season, which doesn't mean that we got to throw him out. Let's not be crazy about what rookie development looks like. But all the people who talk about him moving into guard, I don't see it. I think he's so long in his frame right now that even if you get a lower end starter, think Charles Leno, who I know nobody likes talking about, but a cheap tackle that does his job and gets pushed around a little bit, but ultimately holds up his end. That could be what the Bears look at. I don't know, man. It's whether if they invest big money in Gallup, they're probably not looking at a guy like Jalen Tolbert, right? If they invest big money in Mike Williams, they're probably not trying to find Drake London specifically in the draft. But also, if they re-sign James Daniels, grab Brian Jensen, and also add a tackle in free agency, I don't think they're going to be looking at Zion Johnson. So there's a certain element of draft talk that's like, let's wait till March and we'll know a lot more about what the Bears are actually looking for. Hard to tell right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny that you mentioned Mike Williams. I was looking at Mike Williams last week, and I'm like, Mike Williams, a guy that, in San Diego, what he could go up and get it. Like, he touchdown machine, he'd go up and get it, but he wasn't like for a while there in San Diego, I felt like he wasn't finding it. He was he ever going to figure it out? Were they ever going to start connecting? And they obviously were. We have I forget the quarterback's name, Justin Herbert. They're at quarterback now. I like a guy like Mike Williams intrigues me just because maybe you save some money with him. You know what I mean? Maybe you save some money. But Michael Gallup, I really, really like. I think Michael Gallup will benefit from getting away from Dallas, getting away from Big D, the spotlight, the pressure, all that.
He's only coming to the third biggest media market in the world. It's not that big a deal. It's much smaller and quieter here.
But where the Bears are, it's kind of funny. You're absolutely right, but it's kind of funny because I feel like where the Bears are, it's almost like a hiding place. You know what I mean? It's like you could go ahead and hide and define yourself here because of the turnover, because of the youth, because of where they are as an organization, because of the the coaching staff and what they're preaching. But yeah, like you said, it's whatever they do in free agency will dictate it, and I'm eager to see it. You're obviously eager to see it.
Oh yeah.
Let's go to the defensive side before we go ahead and switch over to just strictly Bears talk.
Sure.
We talked about the three technique. We talked about the three technique. We talked about cornerback. Who are you putting next? First of all, where are you putting Roquan? Second, who are you putting next to Roquan? That's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, what are you going to do with Roquan? And then after that, how are you going to get the secondary tougher?
So maybe I'm not evaluating them well, but I'm not near as high on a lot of this linebacker class as a lot of other people I've seen. Now, there's a chance that people could get better at it. And by people, I mean the prospects, because obviously they come out of college where covering guys is a little bit less important. It's not to say that running backs aren't running routes and so on and so forth in college. It's more to say that in college, you have to play that run support role a lot more often when you're somebody like Chad Muma on Wyoming than you do in the pros, where oftentimes you'll have defensive linemen, like somebody just mentioned, Eddie Goldman in the comments, like guys like him, that their whole job is to control the offensive line and just leave it there so that the linebackers don't have to. If it's me, Roquan's going to play in that Darius Leonard spot. It's the turnover machine spot, but he needs a dude next to him. I think that guy's coming in free agency too. I think this is a hard draft to just pull a linebacker out and say, found it, Roquan. We found your guy. And it's going to be much more realistic that the Bears pull somebody, whether it's from Indianapolis, whether it's from an Indianapolis-like system. I haven't taken a great look at the linebackers, so I wish I had a name for you. But the linebackers that are going to be there in the round 2, round 3, round 4 positions just don't make me feel like the Bears have a solution in mind, right? I mean, Alec Ogletree and Danny Trevathan are obviously not a solution per se, and this linebacker position needs a guy at it. But if you saw the same playoffs I did, the Bears would have a better shot of figuring it out with more personnel and better skill on offense than they would finding that 3 technique and say Devontae Wyatt at 39, adding Chad Muma at number 71, and just figuring it out on the offensive end. So it's hard for me to say what they're going to do at linebacker right now, but I think they're going to put Roquan at the will position. And then it's just a matter of finding a Mike and a Sam to play next to him.
His speed changes everything. Like his speed, we talk about his aggression, and you could be aggressive, but the speed, we had the benefit of watching Urlacher, and then Briggs as well. Briggs had speed on him too.
Oh, yeah.
But we had the benefit of watching those two guys. But watching Roquan, the way the heat-seeking missile that he is, the way he hunts, it's impressive. And I just I hope they do him right, and it's not all Roquan. You know what I'm saying? Like where it's like, oh, we never really find somebody to help you out. Let's go ahead
and do that. I mean,
right? I hope not.
Well, the funny part about Roquan is I don't think Pro Bowl awards are always fair, right? I mean, let's think back to, gosh, it was years ago. Am I thinking of like 2010, something like that? Jay Cutler threw a guy named DeAndre Hall 4 interceptions and basically got him into the Pro Bowl just with that game alone. I mean, you need the stupid volume counting stats to get these awards. And I would swear to you up and down, Ivan, that Roquan was that interception for a touchdown away, like the one in the Saints game in overtime. I'm sure we all remember it. If he catches that ball and runs it back, I bet you he's second team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler immediately. Just that one play. And so this Eberflus defense, which helps that linebacker in particular generate takeaways, does the arm length that Roquan has, because he's 23rd percentile, whereas Leonard was obviously like almost 100th percentile. He's like upper 90s. Is that the difference in takeaways with Roquan's speed and his sense for coverage? I don't think so. So if he can pick up, say, 4 to 6 takeaways across the year, I think he'll get all the awards that Bears fans have been pining for him to, because as silly as it sounds, that dumb stuff like statistics and numbers when it comes to defensive takeaways matters a lot more than tackles nowadays,
Oh, definitely. And you know what? Imagine I got to get a count on the half tackles. You know what I'm saying? I got to get a count on the half tackles, because then you're going to be like, because he's everywhere. He's constantly at the ball. He's everywhere. And the stat, you got to get those stats to really show what you've done. But we see it week in and week out with Roquan Smith. He's everywhere, and he deserves some credit, some way, somehow. Next year, I hope he gets his just due.
I hope
All
so.
right, let's go ahead and start talking about strictly these Bears and what's been going on since year's end. We'll get past the interview that we got past that. We found our coach. Matt Eberflus is our coach. Ryan Poles is our GM. How do you feel about Matt Eberflus? How did you feel about his how do you feel about the hits principles, right? Because I really like that. I really like having something that's pretty much in stone. You know what I'm saying? I like having something in stone, although I'm afraid people are taking it as BU. You know what I mean? Like people are taking it as a BU type of a slogan. And I don't think that's what that is at all. I don't think that's the case. Tell me about Matt Eberflus, how he's been building his coaching staff, this similarity, this understanding of each other, this camaraderie that they've had put together. And it's kind of impressive because everybody in this coaching staff seems to know one another or have worked with one another. How do you feel about what they've done so far?
So look, first thing I want to address is hits principle and the way Eberflus spoke in his presser. Look, me personally, I believe that if somehow I bound you up, Ivan, right, and I stuck you in a basement and I blindfolded you and I played 10 different coaching press conferences back to back, you might think that they were all the same presser by the end of it, because hits principle sounded an awful lot like BU, sounded an awful lot like anything that any other coach has just about ever said. I like the hits principle in theory. I'm glad it works. But I mean, my middle school football coach said the same thing. My high school lacrosse coach said, we're going to hustle. It is just not unique and abnormal to say we're going to hustle like on a football field. Like we heard the speech right before the Senior Bowl, like go out there, hit anything that moves. Football is a pretty simplistically spoken
I almost
game.
jumped up and hit something.
I know,
When
right?
Coach, I almost did. When I saw that, I was like, "Oh shit!" Like, Coach is
Right?
okay. Yes, Coach. I was like, "All right." It was a very fired up moment. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah.
Continue.
At the end of the day, if I could be honest, whether he called it hits or whether he called it like goofball and it was some sort of acronym for the word goofball, I don't care. To me, the difference isn't in the fact that Matt Nagy called it BU. It's in the ability, as much as we would joke about it, to actually find the whys. Because I don't think Matt Nagy could figure out how to teach the details. And if Eberflus can be the detailed coach that he has been in Indianapolis, where I would tell you with a straight face, I don't feel like Indianapolis had a ton of talent on that roster. I mean, they had DeForest Buckner, obviously. They had Darius Leonard. But if we've seen anything in Chicago over the last couple of years, especially this last year, right? Eddie Jackson goes down, and as much as fans hated him, the defense got obliterated for the next like 3 weeks. Or once Jackson left, because when you lose a fundamental piece of talent, all of a sudden there's a hole in the back of your secondary, and Duke Shelley or Alec Ogletree or Kendall Vildor or Deion Bush or Tashawn Gibson are not good enough to close it, if that makes sense.
No,
And
it makes perfect sense.
Indianapolis didn't have the dudes that Chicago does, which is a weird thing to say because I feel like it's very easy to be almost too much of a fan sometimes. But Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, Roquan Smith, Eddie Jackson, Jalen Johnson is a phenomenal defensive nucleus. And if Eberflus can be the guy that raises the floor of those bottom defenders, like the other six, I think this Bears defense could be a lot better than people think it would. Top five, not what I said. You need guys to do that. But I'm talking above average, surprising in takeaways, spiny, and enough to where if the offense can find its way into the top 12, you've got a really competitive team. Now, you asked me about Eberflus, and I just want to be really honest, right? Anytime you hire a defensive coach, especially in 2021, 2022, the obvious question is how do you fix the offense? You can't win in the modern NFL 13-10 often. You just shouldn't count on it. And so a defensive head coach needs to be willing to make the offense better and make the offense the focal point of the team, which I think can be hard for a lot of defensive coaches. At least in theory, it sounds hard. But at the same time, I mean, that offensive coaching, like, what is it? The offensive coaches that get hired start to get so, dare I say, underqualified that when you're hiring the Packers quarterback coach to be your head coach and the Rams offensive coordinator and somebody else that Sean McVay knows and so on and so forth, like it's great and maybe it'll work. But Brian Dabble was probably my number one. I had Byron Leftwich, who didn't even end up getting hired, as my number two, with Eberflus after that on account of just how detail-oriented he is. So am I like, over the moon? I mean, I'm happier than otherwise because I feel like it was hard to get worse than where things were from a Nagy era. But Luke Getsy has a lot to live up to, and it's a very young staff. So hopefully they get it right, you know?
No, definitely. And I like it, like you said, it's coach talk. I mean, he's obviously trying to fire everybody up, and quite honestly, I don't know if it was the right time. Like you said, it wasn't bad, it wasn't good. I was just like, all right, coach, good. Like if this
Sure.
is what you stand by that and get these guys to execute your principles. I'm call it whatever you want, like you
Right.
mentioned. Just make sure that they execute. Just make sure that they buy in. I want to play a clip. It's about 2 minutes long,
Let's
but
do it.
It's Alan Williams, our defensive coordinator. I believe he was asked by Brad Biggs how these guys are going to how he's going to get these guys to buy in, or when is the buy-in to the system or to the idea of what they're doing on defense going to happen. And here's Coach Williams' response.
Next question, Brad Biggs.
Hey, Coach, Brad Biggs with the Chicago Tribune. I'm curious, how long, in your opinion, will it take to convert to the scheme and get it working at a high level? And then I was also wondering if you could talk about the significance of the three technique position for what you guys are going to require?
You know what? I can't answer how long it will take. I do know this, that some people say, well, 4-3, 3-4. When you have good players are good players no matter what scheme they're in. And we have good players. And how long does it take for them to, you said, I think, be a good defense, and a good defense that you can recognize the things that we talk about? I'm not sure about that. I'm not going to put a timetable on that, or a stopwatch on that, or a calendar on that. That's going to happen when it happens. It's going to be, the buy-in that we talked about. It's going to be the players that we acquire. There's some factors in there that I'm not sure how long it will take. If you're talking about our 3 technique, we want that guy to be athletic. We want that guy to be instinctive. We want that guy to be able to stay on his feet. When he gets a one-on-one, we want that guy to be able to beat his one-on-ones. And really, the things that I'm talking about, you can probably say that about everybody on our defense, about those things. We want that guy to play with relentless effort. We want that guy to be smart. So that guy is one of the staples of the defense, because one of the things I do believe is that good defense is built through the middle. And so that's the middle part of our defense. So that guy's going to be a tremendous part of the success of Chicago Bears football, and specifically Chicago Bears defensive football.
Sorry, I had to unmute the mic. That was Alan Williams, a defensive coordinator of the Chicago Bears. And to me, he like Russell said, he's describing Akeem Hicks, he's Warren Sapp, Tommy Harris. Like, he's describing that, but what he was saying is, like, he's not going to try to drive. I feel like they're not going to try to drive this on these guys. They're going to see who they have, right? This is year 1. Are you going to buy in or not? Like, the guys that are going to buy in are going to buy in. They're just going to do it, right? The guys that aren't, well, you'll see that they'll thin them or separate themselves from the herd. You'll be able to recognize who's not buying in and be able to move on from them, because it sounds like, and I want Bears fans to understand this. The Bears need to build for the long haul. And I think you understand. I think you want that as well. The Bears need to build for 10 years ahead. Start thinking like that. Start thinking like these dynasty type teams, and stop thinking like, so nearsighted. For me, I think the Bears will try to compete for sure next year, but don't be like playoffs is out of the question if you're a Bears fan. Like, think logically. Competing, maybe competing with some good teams, right? Maybe being that second half type of a team that fights, and hey, look at Chicago. Look at what Chicago's doing. Maybe they're going to be a force to be reckoned with next season. I'm looking at the Bears to be that, not some world beaters, but I think that yes. What they're going to do is, and what Alan Williams will do is get a Eddie Jackson. If you're not going to buy in Eddie, something's going to, like, you might get cut if you don't get Travis Gibson. Just naming the guys. If you don't get them to buy in, I think they'll move on from
Mario Edwards
rather than later, right?
Mm-hmm. Mario Edwards is a name that comes up there if you want to talk about effort. I think Eddie Jackson gets way too much heat for the way that he plays, the way that he runs, and the way that he has operated as a safety. I am as close to the president of the Eddie Jackson fan club as you're going to find, because I think the more of all 22 you watch,
this is where we combat, Robert. Because
okay.
I've been very critical of Eddie,
I think it's easy to be.
Eddie's talent is above and beyond, right? You can see his talent, but there's a lot to be critical. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
I would tell you with a straight face that I think there's nothing harder than grading an elite safety, because most people would look for takeaways. They want to see plays on the ball. They want to see all the stuff that, if you are a sane quarterback playing the 2021 Chicago Bears, why would you throw it 4 Are you kidding me? So all of a sudden, Eddie Jackson, just for the last year or so at the very least, has been playing this cleanup tackler role that is much more Adrian Amos than it ever was like Eddie Jackson. And he's being criticized for missing tackles, which he has, despite having a surprisingly efficient tackler season last year by the back, or like especially from weeks 5 on. But the point is, I would never tell you that was his game. His game is denying Darren Waller the ball, and the Bears didn't let Darren Waller touch the ball. I think they held him to roughly 55 inconsequential yards in a win over Las Vegas. Eddie Jackson is the guy who sits over the top of Devontae Adams, and when Devontae Adams was being bracketed by Eddie, he didn't get thrown at, and they instead checked the ball down to Aaron Jones, who broke a tackle onto Sean Gibson and waltzed his way to the end zone. You got to remember that when the Bears played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Eddie Jackson had 2 pass deflections, and they didn't record a catch against him, and every single other Bear got a touchdown scored against him. I'm talking Jalen Johnson, who had a 60-yarder drift over his shoulder, Kindle Vildor, who obviously got toasted. Like, I could name the whole Bears defense if you want.
You don't have to, because it's just hearing their name, it scares me every single time. Seeing Vildor get burnt down the
100%. So if Eddie does have a problem with Matt Eberflus, I'll be right there with everybody else saying ship him out. And I know there's this huge joke right now talking about how Eddie's going to get all these loafs, and I think you guys might end up being surprised, because Eddie Jackson is one of the best cover 2 safeties, I think, in football. I think it was Tyrann Mathieu, when asked, like, which safety stands out to you, he was like, Eddie Jackson's the best cover 4 safety in the game right now, which that was completely unprompted. Well, I like in terms of Jackson. They asked about a safety. Jackson's the name that came up. The problem is right now is that if you aren't Minkah Fitzpatrick, like if you're not in a system that is feeding guys to you, you will either look like Jamal Adams out there, who is obviously struggling for obvious reasons, or you just won't get thrown at. I mean, there's a specific game I remember. In case you guys want to see what I'm talking about, go watch the 2019 first Bears-Vikings meeting, and you're going to see at least 6 plays where Kirk Cousins looks in Eddie's direction, sees Eddie's there, and goes somewhere else with the ball. Like, quarterbacks started to treat Eddie, I wouldn't say like he was Ed Reed. Let's not put that level of praise. In fact, I would say that marketing might have made things worse for Eddie Jackson, the safety. But think about it. In 2018, there was no good place to put the football. You either had to throw at Kyle Fuller in the prime of his game. You had to throw at Bryce Callahan, one of the best nickels in football. You had to throw at a surprisingly good and underrated corner in Prince Amukamura. You had to throw at Adrian Amos, who tended to be in the right position, despite what we thought of him at the time. Or you had to throw at Eddie Jackson. And because you still had linebackers like Roquan Smith and a really good zone defender in Danny Trevathan, you built this coverage net that didn't give quarterbacks any room to breathe or any place to put the football. And that's where Eddie's shown. After that, Amukamura got cut. After that, the Bears lost Bryce Callahan. You started picking up these players where, whether it was Buster Screen, who's a name that makes Bears fans shudder, or whoever else came along, even as Kyle Fuller started to give up 10 to 12-yard cushions. I'm sure you remember this, Ivan, in the middle of this rant. People could just put the football wherever they wanted it to be. And Eddie Jackson doing this thing where he lines up in the slot and basically plays nickel corner, can I be the first to tell you, I think that's stupid. That's where I draw the line. I don't know who in the coaching room is deciding that Eddie needs to be a man defender, because sure,
surprising enough, he made tackles, which was and my biggest issue, and I could understand, and I understand. I want to say I understand what you're saying.
Right.
My biggest issue with Eddie is the mental aspect, and just I mean, honestly, I don't need you to blow anybody up. But when somebody's in the open field and you're the guy, you're the safety. And I get you're the ball hawking safety. I get you could take the ball back for 6. But when we need you to do something, when we need you to be a football player, sometimes it's like, oh, look at that. And it's probably a lot more blown up because it's a lot of them were on like national television. You know, you had you had the Rams game. Then, you know, at the end of the year, you know, George mentioned you had the Vikings game. Yeah, it was horrible. So
the last one that he had with Justin Jefferson, I mean, You think about it from the football perspective, right? He rides this guy down the field, and 99 out of 100 plays, the play is over. So he looks over his shoulder. He doesn't see the ball. He rides Justin Jefferson, who literally comes to a standstill. And then he looks back for the ball, and the ball goes over his head and ends up in Jefferson's hands. I'm not excusing it. It's a bad play. I agree. I'm still shocked Cousins threw the ball. Like, there's late, there's really late, and then there's when Cousins threw it, which, like, the receiver treated it like it was an after play ball, which does that make Eddie amazing? No, he's a safety. He's not a corner, right? His ideal goal is to be in position and honestly denies throws before they ever show up, which is part of why, Ivan, I don't blame any Bears fan that doesn't like him. Any of you listening, I don't blame you, because all you see on the broadcast are any bad play. And if he makes a play, you won't see it because the quarterback either took a sack and they show the replay of a 4.5-second sack, which you've seen plenty of them. And they go, what an amazing sack. And it's like, man, he had all day. He got to deploy 3 pass rush moves and finally got home.
Exactly.
Or it's Jamar Chase cutting in the middle of the Bengals game and Eddie Jackson annihilating Kindle Vildor because the receiver just jumped left out of absolutely nowhere. And everybody goes, are you kidding me? And I don't blame a soul. You know what I mean?
No, I get it. And it's because Eddie, the way I see Eddie, I see Eddie as criticism is justified, right? Criticism, I feel, is justified. To call him an absolute, like, just like you're absolute garbage is not justified. Right. Eddie needs to hold himself accountable, I feel like.
Right.
Eddie needs to, his mind, his whatever pregame warm-up, whatever he has to do, Eddie needs to focus on football. And I think Matt Eberflus and this principle can help that. I think he can be better than he was for sure for the past 2 years. Will he get back to 18? I mean,
never.
Can the team ever get back to 18? I doubt that. So to ask that of him, I would say that's too much to ask of him. But giving more of an effort, bettering yourself. Eddie Jackson, if Eddie Jackson was the first to buy in to Alan Williams and Matt Eberflus's defense, that would be something to look forward to. That'd be something to hang your hat on and say, hey, look out for Eddie Jackson to make a jump and show us that talent that we know he has.
What the Bears need to do, because this is two-parter, right? You saw this got really bad in 2020. Eddie Jackson, I thought anyways, started acting like he needed to be more than one safety can be. It was as if he started trying to jump routes. And I mean, look, I don't know, Ivan, what your opinion is on Trevon Diggs, but when a corner or a safety starts exclusively jumping for the ball, you are going to give up thousands of yards because you can get beat on all kinds of double moves. And so I want Eddie to trust his teammates more, right? I think that when you trust your teammates and you trust the defensive system around you, you play your game, you let the game come to you, and you do what makes you special, right? I think everybody would agree. Now, that's a two-parter, because if you're trying to ask Eddie Jackson to trust Duke Shelley or Kindle Vildor, come on. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And competition is a problem as well. You know what I'm saying? It's a huge issue because, like you had mentioned, Eddie goes down and we're looking to for the third, fourth. We're looking for, anybody to go ahead and try to just play
Ridiculous.
the spot, just to play the spot. So, creating competition, I think, around that position, right? Making sure Eddie understands that you got to compete. Getting, maybe boot to the butt, in a sense, not saying that you got to overcoach him or mother F him, behind closed doors.
Exactly.
But getting him to understand, getting Eddie to buy in. If Eddie buys in,
that leader, then
he could definitely revitalize what he had in 18, 19, that don't throw to Eddie because Eddie's going to make a play. Right. That type of mentality, that type of player that he was. I think you could get that with this coaching staff.
Oh, yeah. And my favorite part about this coaching staff is that if you think about 2020, right? Look, this is simultaneously my one shining ray of hope and also my way to explain how I feel about a bunch of names that you don't really know, right? But the 2020 Chicago Bears had John DeFilippo as their quarterback's coach, who's obviously a legend from his time with the Eagles. They had Sean Desai, the basically chosen son. This is 2021, not 2020. The chosen son of Vic Fangio. They had Bill Lazor, who's fine, and we all get that. But they had Clancy Barone, who's basically been a Pro Bowl tight end factory, and a whole bunch of other names, whether it was Harry Hiestand, who spent time with the Bears as a legendary offensive line coach. They consistently had these names that were incredibly attractive coaches. But if you look back, I don't know if they spoke the same coaching language. Look, this is entirely speculation on my part, right? But Matt Nagy came from pretty much exclusively the Reed tree. And John DeFilippo and the Philadelphia offense probably worked a little bit differently and talked about the game a little bit differently. And Bill Lazor, who spent tons of time in Cincinnati, probably talked about the game a little bit differently. And Mark Helfrich, who was at Oregon, for crying out loud, talked about the game a little bit differently. And this would be like, Ivan, if you brought a bunch of guys together and one of them was speaking in a British accent, one of them speaking in Spanish, but technically knows English, one of them is speaking Portuguese, another speaking standard American English, and a whole bunch of other, you get it, like regional differences, that things can get just lost in translation, right? This Colts, or this, well, now it's the Bears. You can already figure out where I'm going. The Bears basically picked up the whole Colts defensive staff and brought it to Chicago, and they're all speaking the same language, and they have been for years at this point. That's really exciting when you think about bringing the bottom up. With the Bears, they're right now, their offense, they're obviously going to be trying to take a whole bunch of guys that basically have no experience at all, which can be really scary, and hope that they cook something up. But on the defensive end, they are taking what they did and they are going to do it again. And if they change what they're doing, if Matt Eberflus says, okay, so we are going to make these changes so that we can feature Roquan Smith a little bit better. Okay, so we've got defensive end talent now. We're going to try to change the defense a little bit so that Quinn and Mack can be a little bit more of a feature piece instead of the run stuffer that we had in Indianapolis because we just didn't have the guys. If Eberflus says that, Williams knows how to tell the rest of his staff, who all know how to hear it from him. I think that's really exciting. You know what I mean?
No, to have everybody on the same page, it's critical. Like Ryan Poles mentioned in the locker room being the most important thing, having that camaraderie, having the locker room be solid, being the most important thing. And you said it, the voice. It's multiple voices, but it's really just one. It's really just one because of the years together, the understanding of each other, the understanding of the defense. It seems like I when Alan Williams was hired, I was just like, oh, that's kind of perfect. It just fits perfect. Like you have a guy. First of all, I like that he was a safeties coach because that's something where, like we just talked about Eddie Jackson. And then on top of that, I like the fact that you talked about it, that one voice type of approach. We all know what's going on. We all know how to work this defense. Let's go ahead as a unit and just work each individual unit. Alan Williams also talked about just 1% better. 1% better, 1% better, chipping away at what you need to do to build up to be the team that you want to be. I want to switch to the offense. Mm-hmm. I got a clip here from Luke Getsy talking about how we're all speculating about what are they going to do. We obviously they need a receiver. How are they going to run the offense? Are they going to be Shanahan? Are they going to be a Frankenstein type of offense? What are they going to do? And it seems like Luke Getsy has his own plan for it. It seems like it's going to be an original type of an offense. It's going to be something that's, I guess, original, but not so original. In a sense. Let's listen to what Luke has to say.
Adam Hogue.
Hey, Luke. Can you give us an idea of how important the play calling aspect of this move in your career was? And if you don't mind, can you kind of run through what your play calling experience is, whether I think that would have been at the college level, but can you just kind of give us an idea of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about, furthering your career, what play calling would do. Is that what you're alluding to right there?
Yeah, and just the opportunity to, obviously you were working under an offensive coordinator
Sure.
and Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, and now you're got a defensive head coach here, and this offense is
Sure.
you're looking at, yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Adam. No, listen, the passion that I have for this game and the the passion to take the reins was something that is just it's deep inside me. I think, playing the quarterback position growing up and having that, being, the leader of the offense, playing it through college and then getting a couple opportunities, like you said, in the college level to take the reins of an offense and be the play caller. All of that stuff is just in me. It's what I love. It's the passion. And these last couple of years, Matt's been great up, and Coach LaFleur has been great in giving us opportunities to do that in the preseason. And so, like, those are just things. Once you touch it, man, you're just like, this is the passion that I have. It's not just whatever it can become after it. It really isn't. This is just the passion that I have to be able to have an opportunity to lead men and help guide this thing and be a part of something. I really don't view this thing as just going to be Luke Getsy's offense. It's what was mentioned before. This really isn't going to be that. Okay, this is going to be a collective group doing this together. That we're going to build something that's going to be our own. And so I just have a passion for being involved in that. I really do. And so I'm super excited about this opportunity, the group of men that we got together in this coaching staff. I mean, these men, they all bought into that. Like I laid it out for these guys on this offensive staff that this is the mindset that we want to have, that we want this thing to be ours. This isn't going to be somebody else's or a copycat of somebody else. This is going to be ours. Like, we all have our experiences and we're going to put them together and we're going to build this thing together.
Guys, that was Luke Getsy, offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears, courtesy of the Chicago Bears. And you heard that you start seeing, you hear Shanahan, you know what I mean? You talk about McVay, you talk about all these trees and things start to get blurred, right? You start to say, well, what are they really going to be? I honestly think, and he says it's going to be their own. I mean, maybe it's your own, maybe they start with your own, but I think you need to, it's a real possibility that you're going to see that Shanahan type of offense. Not maybe necessarily exactly San Francisco, but maybe some of what they did in Green Bay, maybe some of what they're doing in San Francisco as far as a run game. I feel like with the running backs, you could do multiple things. You could go under center and have David Montgomery back there. You could be in shotgun and have Khalil Herbert back there, and I think you'll be okay. I'm looking for Luke Getsy to really just focus on Justin. I want it to be one piece at a time. I'll put it that way. Just to simplify it. One piece at a time. You said it was going to be Justin. It's a quarterback-driven league. How are you going to put that around Justin? Do you think that Luke Getsy, and I think the question Adam Hogue was asking, I think he was trying to get to see if this was just Luke's wanting to be a play caller. He needs to be similar to what Matt Nagy, that type of, I have to be involved in everything. Is this who you are? And I don't think that Luke Getsy with the response leads off with that. How do you feel about Luke Getsy and his offense? Where do you think they're going to go, and how do you think they're going to build it?
Well, if you don't mind, can I answer your question by first asking you a question? You mentioned that Luke Getsy is more than likely going to bring over a lot of what they did in San Francisco, a lot of what they did in Green Bay. Would you mind elaborating? What specifically do you mean?
Well, a lot of outside zone, a lot of running, a lot of bootlegs, right? A lot of play action. You know what I mean? The San Francisco, as far as the running attack, they get downhill. It's using that running game to get Justin Fields rolling out and using that play action and attacking down the field with deep crossing routes and deep routes. Just trying to attack that way. That's where I see. And then if you look at Green Bay, how they use both running backs, they had Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. Jones, they had him for a while, and sometimes they would finish the whole drive. But Jones was the 30 guy, in between the 30s, the middle of the field, and then all of a sudden here comes the hammer with AJ Dillon, where they were just, boom, we're in the end zone, or we're at the end zone. Here goes Devontae, or there goes one of the running backs walking into the end zone. That's kind of how I see Luke Getsy. All right, that's how I hope Luke Getsy attacks or fixes his offense up.
Oh, yeah. If anything, the main reason I ask is because everything that you started with, I'll go back through the itemized list, right? Outside zone, under center, play action attack, bootlegs, crossing routes down the field off of play action. That sounds a lot more like the Justin Fields 2021 Chicago Bears offense than I think some people realize. I mean, the Bears were practically running only outside zone. They didn't attack out of bootlegs, I think, enough, but they also, I would swear to you, they had 2 bootleg plays, like just 2 or 3, maybe. It wasn't as if they had this diverse layered sheet where at the end of the day, what I keep coming back to is, truth be told, they could line up in the pistol. They could line up in the shotgun. They could line up under center. I don't really care. To me, what makes Shanahan offense so special is that they mask every play within every other play. They don't do what the Bears did, where it's 1st and 10, we're going to run the ball. Okay, so we didn't get the yards. Now it's 2nd and 9, right? Now we're in the shotgun. Now we've got a 5 receiver set. We had 13 personnel, but now we have a 5 receiver set with no running back on the field, and we're in empty. What are we doing, Ivan? We're passing the ball, right? The Bears would have these moments where the system just broke, right? And they went to one of their plays, and one of their plays was completely outside of this Shanahan light thing that they were doing on 1st and 2nd down or whenever they were on schedule. That, to me, was what torched the Bears offense, was that if you put them in a bind, if you waited for a Sam Mustipher-led offensive line or a receiving core that was basically Darnell Mooney and only Darnell Mooney to eventually make a mistake, and with the rookie quarterback, there were plenty of mistakes, eventually they would just hand you the ball on 3rd down. Not in terms of a takeaway, right? But in terms of, oh, I bet you they're running all hitches. Would you believe it?
And it's pretty much, after a while, you start counting cards, right? You just, all right,
Exactly.
here it is, here it comes, and like you said, everything that I mentioned, the execution is different, right?
It's different.
It's the execution and how, like you had mentioned, how you disguise it, how you scheme it. The coaches matter. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The coaches and the decision making matters. We talked about it. You had all these voices speaking different language, talking the same thing, but speaking different languages.
Right.
And now you have this one voice, and it's going to be Getsy and Janako from Andrew Janoko from the Minnesota Vikings. It's going to be them two. It's gonna come down to them two and how they're going to mold this offense, mainly with Justin Fields. But do you believe? Well, I can't say you do. I don't want to say that, because we need to just see what they do as far as free agency in the draft. But if they could find, because talent matters as well, if they could find, let's say they signed a Ryan Jensen, right?
Sure.
If they could find maybe one other piece, or add pieces behind, let's say the starters. Let's say if Larry Borum is going to be your starter, right?
Sure.
Adding more pieces behind him and just making sure that's the main focus of the offense. I think the defense, regardless of what happens with them, because of the coaches that they have and because of that familiarity, I think the defense, even with the drop off in talent, let's say somebody gets hurt, or I think the defense could keep them afloat, or at least the coaching staff and the principal and the identity could keep them afloat. Offense, like you mentioned it, the Bears are doing a lot of these things. Execution and talent was just lacking.
It's everything. I mean, that's the reason I talked about it, is because I think that there are some people, and this might catch some folks off guard. I think there are a lot of people out there that are over dramatizing how much scheme matters, which is by no means me trying to say that scheme doesn't matter. It's more that, to me, it's all in the setup. It's how well do plays set up other plays. I'll give you an example. The Chicago Bears wide receivers over the last 2 or 3 years absolutely could not block, no matter what you asked of them. They could not block. It was Darnell Mooney who would block, and nobody else could. Javon Wims? No. Allen Robinson? No. Marquise Goodwin? Nah. Why are you asking Demir Bird to even
and
try?
It's funny because they're asking him to block D linemen and guys twice their size, which is crazy.
That's a McVay thing, though. McVay does that all the time with guys like Van Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, Josh Reynolds. I mean, they'll come across and chip somebody. It's not the scheme that necessarily was broken in Chicago, which I think a lot of people would look at me and be like, are you on crack? And I would look back and say, toss crack should not be a loss of 3 yards every time you call it. Like, you can say throw the playbook out if your team can't execute it, but the execution will hopefully not will be, but in the Nagy era, it was always, if not a problem, the problem, because you can't run outside the tackles if your wide receivers can't hold an edge at all. I mean, like we could name a whole bunch of little things, but it was like, oh, we've got a quarterback in Justin Fields that's exceptional throwing downfield. Let's surround him in an offense that almost exclusively throws the ball short. Oh, we've got a quarterback that can throw the ball well downfield. Let's make sure that the offensive line can't block for over 2.5 seconds to save their lives. Like there were so many broken pieces that if I told you, Ivan, hey, I want you to design me an offense, but just know this, none of the wide receivers can block. Your short passing game is going to struggle. Your quarterback is fumbling at an almost record rate. You've got one wide receiver that's trying, another one that thinks he's trying, that's Goodwin, and pretty much nobody else. And a tight end that can catch the ball when he's absolutely wide open, but he might not be the best separator in the world. Also 2 good running backs. Go. You're not going to get a good offense out of that. Like the Bears need to, whether it's better talent or better coaching, probably both, raise what their guys can do. Because in Shanahan's system, even Nick Mullins, a bunch of backups, and a backup offensive line could run a gap scheme well and catch the opposing defense off guard. With the Bears right now, even their best plays failed on 3rd and 1 to the point where it just became embarrassing. Like, yes, we could clown on the fact that they took more penalties out of timeouts than they did advance the ball. Like, we could clown on all sorts of coaching things, but to me, on offense, it is absolutely staggering how often the Bears couldn't even do the basic high school stuff right. And whatever offense Getsy brings in, at the end of the day, if Matt Eberflus is detail-oriented, let's get everything we do right attitude permeates through the whole football team. You mentioned that we got to stop thinking about the Bears making the playoffs. You're right, but this NFC is wide open. I mean, like what is it? The Packers, if they get Aaron Rodgers back, it's the 49ers. Maybe it's the Cowboys, though they're impossible to really get a read on the year to year. And then who? The Vikings? Are we scared of what other NFC teams are you looking at? And you're like, whoa, that freaks me out. I mean, the Bears could be a surprise. They don't need to be a super playoff team, right? Because that's not what I'm saying. But if they're as competitive as you want them to be, if everything goes right for them, they could surprise people. And obviously that all hinges on Justin Fields throwing like 30 touchdowns next year. But that's the step people want to see from him. Like, those are the stakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would be, and tell me if I'm wrong, I would be happy if this regime, if the Bears were, let's say, the same record this time next year, or just a game above, right? You missed the playoffs, but your identity has been established. Your defense is your defensive effort has been, has taken a jump. Your offensive effort and your offensive execution has taken a jump. You see more than just flashes from Justin Fields. Now you see sustained success throughout drives. I mean, drive after drive, continuously stringing drives together from Justin Fields, and you don't make the playoffs, and let's say your same record, or maybe one, or let's give or take 1 or 2 wins. I'm happy with that.
You'll live with it.
I'm happy with that. I could work with that. Mm-hmm. But like you said, when you don't have the execution and effort, like I felt like the Bears had, that's what they were lacking last regime. You get Matt Nagy. You know what I mean? Like you could get that with any type of offense. You know what I'm saying? I felt like the Bears had enough talent to where you could win that 49er game. You could win that Pittsburgh game. You know what I mean? You could beat the Vikings at the end of the year. And now we're looking at 3 extra wins on your record.
I would tell you with a straight face, I think that the Bears got lucky that the bottom fell out of their defense, because I think that they might keep Nagy and Ryan Pace if they had just won a few more games. Like the nightmare schedule that they had. Like if Pittsburgh doesn't the defense completely blows the game. If in San Francisco, the defense doesn't completely blow the game. If the offense, that first Minnesota game, Kirk Cousins had 88 passing yards. If they find 20 points in the dumpster, they win that game. And suddenly we're talking about an 8-9 Bears team that George McCaskey says, oh, well, the 17th game really could have gone either way. They were almost there. They were in the playoff hunt the whole time. Let's renew these guys. Thank God. I mean, what I think is always hard to remember, Ivan, I'm struggling to balance this too, is football is a quick turnaround sport. The Seahawks went from bad to 2 Super Bowls. the the Herbert-led Chargers went from, I didn't realize this quarterback was going to be this good, to literally come on, game 17, tie game, going into overtime, all the way at the end of overtime. It is literally the latest is the latest any team has found out they weren't going to the playoffs in football history at this point. And so I can't help but look at this team and think, obviously, like you said, keep your expectations tempered. But at the same time, Ivan, I want to be brave enough to say that the Bears are expecting a good step forward from Justin Fields. And if they spend on the offensive line, if they add some talent at wide receiver, and we get, prayers up for an average wide receiver room, right? I am not about to try to tell you that the Bears are going to be amazing, right? I am going to say that if they could score some decent points, defense is blessed in Chicago. It took Mel Tucker running Lovie Smith's scheme as defense aged out to have one of the worst defenses Chicago's ever seen. But other than that, it is almost hard to field a bad defense statistically in Chicago. Even Sean Desai with, 2 good coverage players and 5, not just below average, but bad players in coverage, still put together a defense that was by and large pretty average. I don't want to sell too much hope. That's not the point of this. But teams like the Lions, I think, might have a tougher road to contention than a team like the Bears, who just doesn't have anybody on their roster. So the door's wide open. The Bears don't really have a ton of bad contracts now that Quinn sort of righted the ship. They have a bunch of expensive guys, but a lot of them are good defenders, They have, I think really the worst contract on their roster, the one I'll ask you about. Do you have faith in Cody Whitehair to bounce back, or are you kind of waiting around?
You know what? I've mentioned Cody Whitehair a few times, and there's times where you just look at Cody and loafs. We'll start with the loafs. Loafing, loafing is an issue with Cody Whitehair. Can he bounce back with the proper center next to him, with not him at center, with the proper center next to him, whether that be if you go ahead and re-sign James Daniels, kick him over and sign a guard, or whether you go ahead and assign that center to solidify the middle, preferably Ryan Jensen, because he was giving snaps to Tom Brady for the past 2 years. So I would like that kind of connection. But Cody Whitehair is a guy that he has all the talent in the world. I just think that he's just like James Daniels, hasn't been put in the proper position, right? Has been kind of moved around, has been used wherever they need you because he's a football player and wants to and will do it. But finding a solidified position and then putting someone next to him that knows what the hell they're doing. You know what I mean? Sam Mustipher, at best, a backup in a pinch. You know what I mean? A backup in a pinch. And even if he doesn't get better, then even worse than that, then he'll find himself out of the league. I just think that a Cody Whitehair will step up with somebody better next to him.
Right. I think, by the way, if I could just diatribe a little bit on Mustipher, there's no player that I think personally was was a less fun player to cover in 2020 because the signs were there. It's not like a Chicken Little, and God knows this isn't an I told you so, but nobody wants to hear that the young UDFA center looks bad. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to hear, holy moly, Mustipher got blown behind the pocket. He got walked from there to way back there because it's leave the kid alone. He's just a UDFA doing his best. I don't get why Ryan Pace entered the season with him the unquestioned center and nobody else on the roster. That baffles me to this day. I don't know what they were looking for. And yes, Sam Mustipher has become something of a scapegoat, right? For the fact that Cody Whitehair had a pretty terrible season. What is it? Jason Peters was a godsend, almost messianic in what he did at left tackle, given the fact that the de facto left tackle got hurt immediately and basically didn't play until week 13.
And he was on a boat is fishing when he got the goal.
Exactly. But even he wasn't amazing. He was just surprisingly good given how late in the season the Bears got him. I am by no means trying to say that this Bears offensive line was somehow historically bad. In fact, I think there are some people who have overrated how badly they played, but the Joes on the line were never quite good enough. And especially a position like center. All I ever hear from offensive line guys, right? Let me put it this way. If you ask most nerds, most efficiency driven guys, most guys that even know a holistic football team, they would tell you centers are pretty easy to position to replace. They would tell you center is not that big a deal. It's the least valuable position on the offensive line, yada, yada, yada. You've heard it all before. If you talk to offensive line guys, they tell you center is one of the hardest positions on the field. They tell you a good center makes a huge difference. And more importantly, like you said, they talk about how key that cohesion is on the interior. So I'm hopeful that the Bears go spend big on center. To me, there's bargains to be found there. Will Ryan Jensen ever be worth the money that you throw at him? That's a good question. But I do think that there's something to be said. I'm sure you'll agree with this, with having a center, like a veteran center, be the guy in the locker room, where even if he's hurt, he's able to be like, hey, I don't know what you were seeing on that call, but let's go over it together. Give me a tablet. And then he walks through it with the backup center and be like, you see how they're aligned like this? You've got to make sure that you see that when they shift like this, we've got to slide the protection and do something else. I think having that guy can basically give you, I think people use the word coach on the field a little liberally sometimes, but a coach on the field on offensive line, which would be perfect to pair with the nastiness of Tevin Jenkins, the, I think, raw physical skill of Cody Whitehair, even if he's been playing a little bit too much on an island recently, and somebody that rookies can rally around as the Bears try to add talent through the draft.
I agree. I like center. If he wants to be here, they could afford him, and if he's on their radar, by all means, go sign Ryan Jensen. I would love to see Jensen, Daniels, and Whitehair. That middle three. I would like to see that combination of a middle three, because it's, like I said, you've taken two young, good offensive linemen, Daniels and Whitehair, and you've asked them to do so many different things for you that it's like, I feel like they're still not settled. They're veterans on our team, and they're still not settled into their position. Right. So putting a guy like that makes their job easier, right? That knows what he's doing. That's not getting blown back 5 yards into the backfield. That's not whiffing on blocks. That's not missing out on chipping a guy to help you out. I think that you see the best James Daniels. I think you get a very, very, very good Cody Whitehair. Maybe you get the best Cody Whitehair. It all depends on, like I said, competition and leadership. Like you said, leading in that middle, that second coach in the middle. Alan Williams talked about it. They've been talking about it. Ryan Poles has mentioned it, building up front. Yeah, I totally agree. I hope that's where they head, going into this combat. I hope that's where they're targeting. Robert, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up, man. I appreciate you so much, man. It was just a fun conversation.
Absolutely.
I would like to have it do this again, whenever you're free. Definitely getting closer to the combine, because I'm some of these guys, I'm going to probably go ahead and start pulling up some names that you had mentioned, and start looking up tape now tonight. But definitely want to do it again.
Can I plug one guy?
Absolutely.
So there's no way Bears fans have ever heard of this guy before, right? Not a chance. I think that there is a non-zero chance that a guy named Akeem Hicks could end up back in Chicago. Now, that is going to sound weird, right? But remember, free agency comes first, right? And so if the Bears want to target offensive line, it's a new regime. The guys that drove Akeem Hicks out of Chicago aren't here anymore, and the Bears are going to have to find value wherever they can. As much as I would be pro Ryan Jensen, the truth is that the Bears in free agency are probably going to be looking at that second and third wave. And with Akeem as old as he is, I'm not sure that he's going to have some huge market. So I think that there is a chance. I don't want to act like it's a sure thing, right? But there's a chance that Akeem Hicks could be their stopgap option, because they're not made of draft picks. You know what I mean? Yes, when Alan Williams is talking through the player that they want, high motor, ability to win one-on-one, it all sounds like Devontae Wyatt to me. You got to go watch yourself some Devontae Wyatt film.
That's the
Bears
first
fans
guy,
out there if you get the chance.
Dude, when I was telling you, that's the first guy I was going to pull up, Devontae Wyatt.
Yeah.
As soon as you mentioned it, because of I want if you could bring Akeem back, awesome. If you could bring Devontae Wyatt in as well, awesome. Or not, maybe not him, or you find a younger guy. Maybe it's maybe a Tonga develops under, maybe something to that effect. Competition, and just see what happens. Bring bigger, nastier guys up front. I like that idea. I really do like that idea. But looking at Akeem, yeah, you just love him. You can't nobody
hard not to.
nobody hates Akeem Hicks. Nobody can hate Akeem Hicks. His passion, his love for the Bears. He wants to be here. Shot surprisingly enough, he still wants to be here. But yeah, I love me some Akeem Hicks. I hope you're right. I hope they
We'll see.
play it smart.
They
We will
need a
see.
3 tech. It's either Angelo Blackson or it's somebody else. And so we're just going to have to see. But like I think it was Russell said in the chat, Akeem Hicks sounds a lot like the guy that they're talking about. It's not a forever solution, but we're talking about a 2022 where they're going to enter it with a whole bunch, or where they're going to have a lot of money, sure, but they're going to have to sign a lot of guys. They need a lot of different players, even just to go up from, we've all seen it in a video game, right? You got to bring it up from the 60 overall backup to even just like a 73 free agent or something like that. And maybe Akeem Hicks isn't the 90 overall that he used to be, but if he is somebody that they're like, hey, we can't give you a ton. We can give you $5-6 million over each year over a 2-year deal. Does that work for you? Akeem might say yes if he really wants to be back in Chicago. Who knows?
Dude, I'm telling you, I would love to see it. Love to see Akeem back in Chicago. I love me some Akeem. Robert, man, thank you again, dude. Go ahead before you leave.
Sure.
Plug your podcast, Windy City Gridiron. Go ahead and plug everything.
Windy City Gridiron.
Media.
On WindyCityGridiron.com, I do a whole bunch of different film breakdowns whenever I get the chance and away from my 40-hour-a-week job. You can find me on YouTube at Run Pass Opinion. I'll stream a whole lot of different game tape. This next week, I think it's Thursday, we're going to go through what makes the Matt Eberflus scheme the Matt Eberflus scheme, what separates him, say, from Sean Desai, Todd Bowles, and other defensive coordinators. What is his mark? We're probably going to start there, and then we'll go through whether it's draft tape, whether it's whatever else I can think of. Expect as much as I can make.
Hey, good stuff, Robert, man. I appreciate you once again. Guys, check out Run Pass Opinion on YouTube, right? YouTube is
Yes.
Spotify.
So Spotify for the podcast, and that's a bunch of different podcasts. I produce too many podcasts, but the YouTube channel is Run Pass Opinion. Yeah, I know you know the feeling.
All right, Robert, man. Thank you. Have a good night. I appreciate you coming on. Have a good one.
You bet. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, guys, that was Robert Schmitz from Windy City Gridiron. Great conversation, man. Great convo with him. I'm looking forward to seeing what Ryan Poles does. Like Robert mentioned, free agency comes first. How are they going to attack it? Will they go ahead and take a shot on a guy like a Michael Gallup coming off of a knee injury on a discount? We had mentioned they have a lot of holes to fill. Do they go ahead and get an Akeem Hicks and bring him back maybe on a lesser deal? I don't know. We'll see. I hope that whatever they do, just stay true to what you were preaching at the beginning. Stay true to you and stay true to what you were delivering or what you promised to deliver to the Chicago Bear team. Remember, toughness up front, nastiness, nonstop hustle, continuous fight. That's what you're looking for in the players that you want to add to this franchise. Guys, I'm Ivan Vargas. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up now. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to SportsZone Chicago on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to another Bear Show on YouTube. And also make sure you go ahead and download the SportsZone Chicago app wherever you get your apps from. Was a great show with Robert Schmitz, man. It was good talking with him. Senior Bowl, I'm going to go ahead and look at a couple of guys that Robert had mentioned. I'm going to go ahead and continue to look at some free agents. Just continuing to get the wheels turning and trying to figure out what approach Ryan Poles is going to take in his first offseason as Chicago Bears GM. All right, guys. Coach Dre, see you later, man. Have a good night. Russell, Jabari, Armando. Who else is up in here? Alex, y'all have a good night. Everybody watching, have a good night. For Robert Schmitz, I'm Ivan Vargas, man. Peace.